This is Jennifer Pepito with the Restoration Home podcast. This is the show where we talk about the peaceful path to connected families and restored communities. Today, I'm excited to be chatting with Emelie Pepito about building community. It's such an important part of our health and well-being as a family. And I'm glad I get to talk to you about it today, Emelie.
I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation because having just finished up hospitality and thinking about my own community, I just love this topic. And I think having a community is so important.
Yeah, and I want to talk about different aspects of community and even building a community. But first, I just love to talk about having community with your extended family. I think so many moms get irritated with their own moms and they're like, ugh, I don't like the way they do things. I don't like the way they talk to my kids. I don't like the way they parented me. And they kind of end up cutting off community to some degree with extended family. And yet it's so important for us. And I know that you've heard me. I love our extended family, but you've heard me have my own little like complaints or whatever about extended family. And yet, as you guys have grown, my own recognition of how important it is to honor extended family has grown with it. Because I realize now, it was the first time that I really realized this was when I visited you when you were living in Northern Ireland as a student. And I flew over there with my older daughter, younger than you, but one of the older daughters, Eden, and we stayed in your apartment with your roommate. And I was like, oh my gosh, my daughter opened her home to me. My daughter is letting me stay here in her home. My daughter can choose or choose not to share a meal with me, to invite me over, to spend time with me. She's out of the house now and she has choices about this. And it really shook me up in a lot of ways because I realized, wow, like, how do I want my children to treat me as adults? Well, I better sow good seeds because as you sow, so shall you reap.
Yeah. And I think I have loved that aspect of our family. I have appreciated that about you and dad so much as you guys have been so proactive about relationship with us adult children as adults going forward and also been so intentional on relationship. And I think it is so important. And like I'm 30 and I'm still unmarried. And there's been periods like I've lived back on like your guys' property, finishing up my PhD and in this season. And there's been so many times when it has been hard because you have this. I was talking to my brothers about it actually, and we were laughing about how he sometimes will have experiences with like our family when he's with us, and his wife, so my sister-in-law, just doesn't see it. She's like, well, why is that bothering you? Like, it's cute or it's funny. And we can let so much frustration and resentment build up towards the people we're intimate with. And I think our immediate family, this can happen with our children, with our spouses. And it is so tragic. And I think, especially if it's been like, I know a lot of oldest children, it seems to be oldest children, especially from really great families, like not perfect families, because no family is perfect, who have let their parents' mistakes create such a wall between them and their parents. And it's not always easy to be able to be in community with someone that you've been in community with for so many years, where there's so many habits that maybe do rub you the wrong way or you don't appreciate. But I do think, like, so again, going back to like me being 30 and unmarried, I think that there is such a gift to being able to also heal some of those relationship habits and patterns with my immediate family, stay in relationship with them. Like, I'm like, if I can figure out how to have really not just good relationships, but restored kingdom relationships with the people in my life who know me best, who I've experienced the most life with, then it's going to positively benefit every other relationship I have. It's going to be a blessing to my marriage. It's going to be a blessing in just so many ways. And I think being really intentional then about pressing into even what's annoying and being like, what is annoying me right now? And I this is one of my biggest beefs with modern 21st century culture generally, and I see it and even more so in Christian culture, is the idea of boundaries. And like, I'm just gonna set boundaries with my parents, and I'm gonna just be like, okay, you can't come over if you're gonna do this, this, and this, and you can't come over if you're gonna do this and that. And obviously, like, I kind of developed, or I had eating disorders that were at least triggered, or, and I don't mean triggered as in like the bad sense, but just triggered as in like precipitated by my grandfather's comment about how much fudge I was eating at the age of 7. And so I understand that you can have that you do with, you know, small children and your young children want to manage those relationships, but I also think like, as you, if you as a parent are being present to your children, then you don't need to cut people out if you're doing the restoration on the other side of it. And obviously, again, protecting your children's actual physical and emotional safety, very important. But so often of what I see with this boundary setting is it's really just the boundary setter having really immature and volatile internal boundaries. And so like there have been times like you and I have been really open about our relationship, and there have been times when I'm like, ah, and I'm like, no, that's me reacting poorly. Like you're an incredible person. And so some of these times I'm like, this is not, this is a me problem. This is a me being emotional, or me being childish, or me being stuck at 12. And it's like, this is not an area where I need to be like, okay, this is off limits and we can no longer talk about this. And if we talk about this, we're gonna have problems. It's like, no, I need to let God in to sort of heal that story, that narrative that might be causing me some distress. And so, anyways, that's, I just think that if a relationship with our intimate family, if it can be restored, and more often it can than it can't, is so incredibly important.
Yeah, I think that's so good because it is really the foundation of healthy culture. We were in Israel for a Jewish feast. Like we're not Jewish, but we were there at the time of Shavuot, and it was a Sabbath as well. And so it was really interesting to see all these extended families just sitting and relaxing together. And we saw that again a week or so ago. There was a park and it was a hot day, and there was a big probably Eastern European family sitting together and just enjoying each other's company. And there's power in having kind of a tribe about you in a way, having like people who know you. I know, one of the things that would irritate me sometimes with my own parents is they would come over and they would look under my kids' beds and they would tell me like, you need to get your kid to clean out from under their bed, or you need to, and some of that was really valid. Like I was managing a lot of children and there was some organizational stuff that was slipping under the cracks. And some of it might have been, maybe some of our values were different. Like maybe I had slightly more of a value on time together and slightly less on having a perfectly organized home. But letting them have input into my life has made me a better mom and a better person. And it's provided a sense of stability and safety for our family, that we don't just break up with people in our family just because they irritate us. And I think that when we can start to have more long-term relationships, like even looking at the Ten Boom family, Corey Ten Boom lived in a house with her father. She was an unmarried adult, lived in a house with her father. There was another old aunt who lived there. There was another sister who lived there. Like there are many different members of that family who lived there together and got along with each other. And you look at the crisis that we have in our country of homelessness and broken families and kids, getting into dangerous situations or being used inappropriately or even molested. And a lot of that comes from not having enough adults with their eyes on the kids. Unfortunately, sometimes that comes from the adults in the home. But I think that if you're not in family relationship with a perpetrator, if you can work things out and be in community, there's a lot of power and safety there. And then moving on to talking about building a community, because so many mamas listening, they're a military family and they're moving around, or they've had to move for work. They don't have extended family nearby, and they have to get to that point of community and quickly. And I've talked about some of the stories we had of when we lived in Mexico. I had to go get an ultrasound for I was pregnant with my 6th child and I needed to get an ultrasound, and we did not feel safe leaving our children at home in Mexico. We didn't have a babysitter, and we were driving across the border to a Kaiser in San Diego for that ultrasound appointment. And we ended up having to leave all of you 5 kids, like sitting in the car in the parking garage while we went in for that ultrasound. You were 13, so you were technically old enough to babysit, but not old enough in our consideration to be left in an off-grid, no phone house in Mexico. And so we had this awkward situation where you guys sat in a car in a parking garage, but we ended up becoming friends with this pastor family. They had a church called Chapel. It was like in La Mesa, John and Marilyn Hilton, amazing pastors. And they at another point, we had to take that 6th baby later on to the hospital because she had a seizure, and they watched you guys while we were at the hospital, and so it was such a relief to be able to get to that point with some people of feeling safe, like they were family, even though we weren't immediate family or even extended family. And some of the things that helped us get there was being a little bit vulnerable, like to get to a closer relationship, to get into community with people where you could trust each other with your kids, or you could call on each other in a crisis. It takes vulnerability.
Totally. And part of that vulnerability comes from being able to go through conflict. Conflict can be really hard. I'm facing some of that right now, where the closer you get with people, the more likely stuff is going to start coming up that is going to cause issues. And you have to be able to have the humility and the vulnerability to be like, this is an uncomfortable situation, but I want to work through it and stay in relationship with you and stay in connection with you. And I think like the um with the community in Mexico, I also think that like I lived in Northern Ireland and I didn't have a car. And that was our family, even though we'd like lived in Mexico, we'd been missionaries, we still were such an independent family. Like not a lot of wanting to ask for help, not a lot of wanting to sort of in the day to day accept help. Like, and we had great friends in emergencies, and or at least that was my perception of what I had taken on, was that I had to be very independent. And so then moving to Northern Ireland and not having a car, there were times when I was like, I need like I would walk for most of my groceries, and I think 90% of everything I needed I could walk. But there was that 10% where I had to ask for a ride because it was either too far or I needed to pick something up from IKEA that I couldn't carry back on a bus and I needed someone with the car. And so learning to be really a lot more vulnerable in what I and asking for help. And I think there's two mistakes people make when they're building community, especially if you are a military or a missionary family, or just, in the grind of it, is they're either too unwilling to ask for help, or they, because they feel bad about it, they ask for help. And we have this habit sometimes when we ask for help of like almost not sufficiently acknowledging it because we're embarrassed of how much help we need. And I think it's really important to um, be able to ask for help and be able to acknowledge when and be thankful for the help that you receive. And also, like for me, one of the biggest things was just not feeling worth it, like feeling like having such low self-esteem in many ways that I would feel really like nobody would want to help me. Like I'm not worth helping, or if I can't pay you, then I shouldn't ask you for help. And kind of growing out of that has been a lot of, I developed my identity in Christ and getting a lot of healing in those areas and being like, oh, like it's okay for me to ask for help because A, I'm worth it, and B, I would reciprocate it. Like I would gladly reciprocate any sort of offer within the community of like, I get a ride from you, you get a ride from me. And so there's just so much. I mean, I think that's one of the beautiful things about building community, especially building it around needs, is that we're able to grow so much as people, both in the giving and the receiving.
Yeah, that's so good. That I love that you brought that up, because there is so much power as we just are vulnerable, ask for help, and then are willing also to acknowledge the help that we've gotten, and really show appreciation for that help. And one of the ways that I have built community, it's been one of the most powerful ways I've built community, is really through homeschool co-ops. Like, as I started and ran homeschool co-ops with people in my peaceful press community, I was so encouraged. Like, as we got together, we couldn't really hide uh the problems. Like, if your children were misbehaving all the time, you couldn't hide that. If your children weren't learning anything, you couldn't hide that. If you were having a hard day, you couldn't hide that. And you could hide that if you were just, going to coffee and leaving your kids at home. You could hide that if you were just seeing each other at church. But when you're having a co-op together where you're actually trying to teach something to your kids and you're trying to get your kids to do a recitation and you're trying to maybe bake something to bring to the co-op, you really can't hide how you're doing. And it creates intimacy with people. Some of my best friends are women that I have done homeschool co-ops with, and I actually host a conference in California every year with these friends who we have both grown by doing this conference and through doing a co-op together. And it was really simple. I have a blog post called Homeschooling and Community that we will link in the show notes, because it's really simple to, get some friends together who are all using the Playful Pioneers or the Kind Kingdom or the Precious People, and then meet once a week, twice a month, and do some of those projects together. It's so much fun. I mean, some of my happy memories have been making the water wheel from the Precious People when we were studying transportation, and walking down to the creek with the kids and trying out the water wheel in the creek, or doing like potato stamps. Like, some of these fun and messy projects we did in community, dyeing cloth with natural fiber dyes, done in community. And so if you would love to get started with homeschooling and community, with creating life-giving memories and deeper relationships, grab any of the Peaceful Press resources and then download the accompanying co-op guide. You don't even need the guide. You could just pick a project for each week or each month that you're going to do. What we did is we would kind of pick a focus. And so, for instance, if you were studying the Playful Pioneers, then American history would be your focus. You grab a few friends. And for us, we usually had a sweet spot of about 3 to 4 families. And if we had only 3 to 4 families, we could meet in each other's homes. Now, the last co-op I did, there was like 10 families, I think, and we met at an outdoor park all year round. It was Northern California, so there was a few days where we had to bundle up a little bit, and maybe once we had to reschedule because of rain. But we would meet at this park, and then each mom sort of took a different activity each week. So one mom just loved doing snacks. I think she did that the whole year. But there were some moms who were really crafty, and so we would take turns doing the craft. Another mom taught the Institute for Excellence in Writing to the children. And then we would, like, one time we were studying the Kind Kingdom, and one of the projects in the Kind Kingdom is to make a Mott and Bailey, which was like an early form of a castle. Emily, that was so much fun. Like, one of the kids made a Mott and Bailey cake, and they were just so adorable. It made learning so much fun for all of our kids. Like, our kids could see what other people were doing, and it really inspired them. But also, it was just such a wonderful time to get closer with these moms and really develop close community with them.
Yeah, and I definitely loved so many aspects of the co-ops that we did growing up, and it was just fun to do activities. It was fun to have those days. I remember we did one, I think we did New England co-op on our place in Pilot Hill, and just we had like a running creek, and the food that we were making. Remember the Viking one, and everyone there was a season where we were with some amazing families who were really into dressing up, and I remember we all had like Viking costumes, and you made us all these like little tunics, and we had the little like the brooches holding on the sort of pinafores almost, and it was such an amazing way to learn. And I'm sure also from a mom's perspective, because obviously the co-op there was learning, and then usually it would end with like playtime, so it was really fun. And then I'm sure as a mom being able to have that time where your kids are in a community that you feel really safe with, that you've done so much life with, and then being able to sort of relax. And just going back to everything we've talked about community formation, the last thing I want to say in all of this is communication is so important in your connection and your community, and being good at really at quick communication. So like you mentioned earlier, mom, about like your parents in those early days, like saying something about stuff being under your bed. Or I know that like I love your community of ladies, and I have so much respect for them. And but I've definitely seen like times when like little things have happened where it could have become sort of disruptive or hurtful in the group overall if the communication, if your guys' communication wasn't so great, and you guys are able to have those harder conversations and you're able to address things head on. And so a lot of times, like again, back to the parents and the stuff under the bed, like being able to, if someone says something to you in the moment that is hurtful or that makes you feel overwhelmed, being able to be like, oh, like thanks for the feedback on my kids' beds. And I don't have time for that. But if you want to clean under their beds with them, you'd be so welcome to. And being able to, or like, if something happens with a friend in that kind of community, and they, maybe they say something about your kid, or they're always going to be that friend who doesn't feel like they're pulling their weight, rather than letting some of those little bits of resentment sit. Like the peaceful press, when you're doing it as a group and you're doing like the Playful Pioneers bundle as a community and a co-op, every family needs to participate, and it can become really sort of overwhelming if you do have a family that's not, contributing to the recipes or contributing to the crafts. And being able to be like, in a really loving way and in a non sort of heavy way, be like, hey, um would you make sure that you do this? Or even, just would you make sure that you you do bring recipe ingredients if you say that you're going to bring them? Or you've never brought recipe ingredients and everybody else has, would you please bring them for the next time? And being able to just have that really direct sort of non-threatening communication, I think, is so important, and is definitely a skill that most of us haven't learned, um, or haven't seen modeled super well. And it's something that you can learn and you can get better at with practice. And I think it's a really beautiful part of what we get to learn in community, and also part of maintaining community.
Yeah, that's so good, and I think one last thing I'd love to mention is kind of knowing what matters to you in friendship, because in my friendships, in my closest friend groups, there's a lot of personalities, and each person kind of brings something different to the table. Like, some of them are the people that I really feel like I could pour out my heart to, and I could trust them with my secrets. And some of them are the people who, we really pray together really well. They don't all have the same gifts. And so I think recognizing who people are and knowing what to fight for is really important, because not every friendship is going to be that closest, deepest friend where you can tell your secrets to, and it's like free therapy. Do you know what I mean? Some friends are just going to be, someone that is comforting to be around, or someone that you enjoy being around. But having you will never know what kind of friend they are if you don't open up a little bit and make space to spend extended time together. And that's where having a homeschool co-op can be so powerful, is that you, in a way, you can sort of weed out the people who aren't going to be those trustworthy people, and you really get to know people on a deeper level as you spend that extended time together. So we'll link that article on homeschooling and community in the show notes. And in my book, Habits for a Sacred Home, I also talk about this habit of community and some way to develop community. In January, we'll open the Restoration Home community again. We're headed to Nashville in October for a beautiful private retreat with our members. And we hope that you can stay tuned and be a part of that community as well when we open again in January. Thanks for joining today.